The church doors burst open, and 16-year-old Ethan stormed in, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, a crumpled letter clutched in his trembling fist. Gasps rippled through the pews as the organ's melody faltered, the bride's white veil fluttering in the sudden draft. Ethan's eyes, wild with a mix of fury and heartbreak, locked onto his father, David, who stood at the altar, his smile fading into shock. This wasn't how Ethan pictured his Saturday. He was supposed to be at home in their small Chicago suburb, scrolling through his phone or dodging his history homework. Instead, he was here, in a packed church, about to unravel a secret that had been buried for years, a secret that would change everything. Ethan's life had always felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Growing up, it was just him and David, a single dad who worked long hours as a mechanic but always made time for late-night talks over pizza. David was Ethan's hero, the guy who taught him how to ride a bike, who cheered the loudest at his soccer games. But there was always a shadow in David's eyes, a reluctance to talk about Ethan's mom, who'd left when Ethan was too young to remember. She wasn't ready to be a mom, David would say, his voice tight, and Ethan learned not to push. 2 years ago, David started dating Claire, a kind-hearted librarian with a warm laugh and a knack for making Ethan feel seen. When David proposed to her 6 months ago, Ethan was thrilled. Claire was family now, the missing piece they'd needed. The wedding planning consumed their little house swatches of fabric, guest lists, and endless debates about cake flavors. Ethan helped where he could, even if it meant enduring Claire's overly enthusiastic hugs. But then, 3 days ago, everything changed. Ethan found the letter by accident. He'd been rummaging through the attic for his old skateboard when a shoebox tucked under a pile of blankets caught his eye. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed with age, addressed to David in a handwriting Ethan didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened one. The words hit like a punch. "I never stopped loving you. David, I'm sorry I had to leave. I hope one day you'll tell Ethan the truth about me." It was signed, "Yours, Jamie." Ethan's heart raced. Jamie. The name wasn't unfamiliar. David had mentioned a friend named Jamie once or twice. Always vaguely. Always with that same shadow in his eyes. But this letter wasn't from a friend. It was intimate, raw, and it hinted at something David had kept hidden. Ethan read more, each letter peeling back layers of a past his father had buried. Jamie wasn't just a friend. Jamie was a man David had loved deeply, a man who'd been part of their lives until something forced him away. The discovery sent Ethan spiraling. He barely slept, the letters haunting him. Why had David lied? Who was Jamie to him? Really? And why had Jamie left? Ethan's confusion turned to anger, then to a desperate need for answers. He couldn't let his dad marry Claire without confronting him. Not when the truth felt like a ticking bomb. Now, standing in the church, Ethan felt every eye on him. Claire, radiant in her white dress, looked confused, her hands clutching her bouquet. The guests whispered, their murmurs a low hum. David stepped forward, his face pale. "Ethan, what's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. Ethan held up the letter, his hand shaking. "Who's Jamie, Dad?" The words echoed in the silent church. "And why didn't you tell me you loved him?" The air seemed to vanish from the room. David's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked like a man unmoored, caught in a storm he couldn't control. Claire's bouquet slipped from her hands, petals scattering on the floor. Ethan's heart pounded, just set something in motion, something irreversible, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. David took a shaky step toward Ethan, his hands raised as if to calm him. "Ethan, please, let's talk about this privately." "No," Ethan said, his voice breaking. I deserve to know. I found the letters. I know about Jamie. I know you were together. Why did you hide it? Why did you lie to me? The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others leaning forward, caught in the drama. Claire's face crumpled, her eyes darting between Ethan and David. David, she whispered. What's he talking about? David's mouth opened, but no words came. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, seeing his dad so exposed. But he couldn't stop now. The letters had cracked open a door to a truth he couldn't ignore. Jamie wasn't just an enemy, he was a person who'd shaped David's past, who might still hold a piece of his heart. And Ethan needed to know why that piece had been hidden from him. Ethan, David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt me? Ethan's voice rose. You hurt me by lying. You let me think Mom was the one who left us. But it was Jamie, wasn't it? What happened to him? Dad, where is he? The church was deathly quiet, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air. David's face twisted with pain, and for the first time, Ethan saw something new in his father's eyes: fear. Not just fear of the moment, but of something deeper, something buried. David reached for his phone, his hands trembling, and Ethan's stomach dropped. Was his dad really about to call someone, maybe even 911, to stop this? Claire stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. David, talk to him. Talk to us. Whatever this is, we can handle it together. Ethan's eyes stung with tears. He wanted to believe her, but the letters burned in his mind. Jamie's words, so full of love and regret, hinted at a story David had kept locked away. And Ethan wasn't leaving until he knew the truth. David's hand hovered over his phone, his thumb frozen above the screen. The church, with its stained glass windows casting colorful shards of light, felt like a stage where every actor had forgotten their lines. Ethan stood firm, the letter still raised like a flag of defiance, his chest heaving with the weight of his accusation. David, Claire said again, her voice a lifeline in the tense silence. Please, tell us. David's shoulders slumped, and he set the phone down on the altar, as if surrendering a weapon. He looked at Ethan, then at Claire, his eyes glistening. I didn't want it to come out like this, he said, his voice cracking. Not today. Not ever. Maybe. Ethan's anger wavered, pierced by the raw pain in his father's voice. He'd expected denial, maybe even anger, but not this vulnerability that made David seem smaller, human in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. The guests were still, their whispers silenced, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Jamie was everything to me, David began, his words slow, deliberate. We met in college, back in the late 90s. I was studying engineering. He was an art major. He had this laugh, David's voice caught, and he looked down, rubbing his hands together. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like the world wasn't so heavy. Ethan's throat tightened. He'd never heard his dad talk like this, with such unguarded tenderness. The letters had hinted at love, but hearing it from David's lips made it real, undeniable. We were together for 3 years, David continued, his eyes distant. We lived in a tiny apartment in Chicago, scraping by, dreaming of a future we thought we could build. But it wasn't easy. Not then. Not for two men trying to be open about who they were. Claire's hand found David's, her fingers lacing through his. Ethan saw the gesture and felt a pang, part jealousy, part relief. Claire wasn't running. She was listening, grounding David as he spoke. What happened? Ethan asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Why did he leave? David's jaw tightened. and he glanced at the guests, some of whom were shifting uncomfortably. Maybe we should. No. Ethan cut in. You don't get to hide this anymore. I need to know. David nodded. Resigned. Jamie didn't leave by choice. Ethan. He was taken away. His family, they didn't accept him. When they found out about us, they gave him an ultimatum. Cut ties with me or lose everything, his inheritance. His family. His future. Jamie was strong. But he was young. And they wore him down. He left to protect me. To keep me from being dragged into their mess. Ethan's mind reeled. The letters had mentioned pressure. Pain. But this was worse than he'd imagined. Jamie hadn't abandoned them, been forced out. So you just let him go? Ethan's voice was sharp. Accusing. I didn't have a choice. David said. His voice breaking. I was 23. Ethan. I was scared. Broke. And trying to figure out who I was. After Jamie left, I fell apart. I tried to move on. To bury it. Then I met your mom. Ethan flinched at the mention of his mother. The story he'd grown up with her leaving when he was a baby felt like another lie now. Tangled in this new truth. Was she a cover? He asked. The words bitter. Did you even love her? David's face crumpled. I loved her. Ethan. Not the same way I loved Jamie. But I did. She was kind. And she wanted a family. We tried to make it work. But she could tell I was incomplete. When she left, it was because she knew I couldn't give her all of me. And then it was just you and me. The church felt smaller now. The air thick with emotion. Ethan's anger was fading, replaced by a hollow ache. His dad wasn't a villain, he was just a man who'd been broken by a world that didn't make room for him. But there was still a piece missing. Where's Jamie now? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David hesitated, his eyes flicking to the phone on the altar. I don't know, he admitted. After he left, I tried to find him, but he vanished. No calls, no letters until those. He nodded at the paper in Ethan's hand. They started arriving a few years ago. No return address. I don't know how he found me, or why he's writing now. Ethan's heart sank. He'd hoped for a clear answer, a resolution. But this was Messier. Unfinished. He looked at Claire, who was still holding David's hand. Her eyes wet but steady. Are you okay? He asked her, suddenly aware of how this must feel for her. Standing in her wedding dress. Her future unraveling. Claire smiled. A small, sad curve of her lips. I'm processing. But I love your dad, Ethan. And I want to understand. The guests were starting to murmur again. Some standing. Others slipping out quietly. Ethan felt a surge of guilt crash this moment. Exposed his dad in front of everyone. But he couldn't have stayed silent. Not when the truth was so close. David picked up his phone again, his fingers trembling. I need to make a call, he said, his voice low. Not 911. Ethan. But I need to try something. Who? Ethan asked, his pulse quickening. David didn't answer. He dialed a number, his face a mask of determination and fear. As the phone rang, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Was Jamie out there, waiting to be found? Or was this call about something else, something David was still hiding? The line connected, and David's voice was barely audible. Hey, it's me. We need to talk. Ethan's breath caught. Whoever was on the other end held the key to the next piece of the puzzle. And Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for what they'd say. David's voice trembled as he spoke into the phone, his words too quiet for Ethan to catch. The church, once a stage for celebration, now felt like a courtroom, with Ethan, Claire, and the remaining guests as reluctant jurors. Ethan's grip on the letter tightened, the paper crinkling under his fingers, as he watched his father's face for clues. David ended the call abruptly, his hand shaking as he lowered the phone. "He's coming," he said, his voice hollow. "He'll be here soon." "Who?" Ethan demanded, stepping closer. "Who's coming?" "Dad." David looked at him, his eyes raw with emotion. "Jamie's brother, Mark. He's the only one who might know where Jamie is." Ethan's stomach twisted. Jamie's brother. The letters hadn't mentioned a brother, but they'd hinted at a family that had torn Jamie away. Was Mark part of that? And why was David calling him now, in the middle of this chaos? Claire touched David's arm, her voice gentle but firm. "David, you need to explain. All of it. Now." David nodded, running a hand through his hair. He gestured toward a side door, away from the prying eyes of the guests. "Let's go somewhere private. Ethan, Claire, you deserve to hear this." They followed him to a small room off the main sanctuary, a cluttered space with hymnals stacked on shelves and a single window letting in soft light. The guests' murmurs faded as the door closed, leaving just the three of them. Ethan's heart pounded, was finally going to get answers, but the weight of the moment felt suffocating. David sat heavily in a chair, his hands clasped tightly. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Ethan. I thought I could protect you by keeping it buried. But you found the letters, and now I owe you the truth." Ethan sat across from him, the letter still in his hand. Claire stood by the window, her wedding dress catching the light, her face a mix of concern and resolve. "Start from the beginning," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. David took a deep breath. "Jamie and I were inseparable in college. He was vibrant. He saw beauty in everything, even in me when I didn't see it myself. But his family was old money, conservative, the kind who cared about appearances. When they found out about us, they didn't just disapprove, they acted like I was a disease." Ethan's chest tightened. He'd grown up in a world where being gay wasn't a scandal, at least not in their little corner of Chicago. But he knew the stories, the struggles of the generation before him. "What did they do?" he asked. "They threatened to cut him off," David said. "No money, no contact, nothing. Jamie's dad was a lawyer, powerful, connected. He made it clear that if Jamie stayed with me, he'd make our lives hell. Jamie tried to fight it, but his dad had leveraged legal threats, rumors that could have ruined my career before it started. And then there was Mark." "His brother?" Claire asked, her voice soft. David nodded. "Mark was different. He was younger, still in high school then, but he looked up to Jamie. He didn't care about us being together, just wanted his brother to be happy. But he was a kid, caught in the same family pressure. When Jamie left, Mark was the only one who kept in touch with me. Secretly. He'd call, check in, tell me Jamie was okay. But then he stopped, too. I didn't hear from him for years until recently." Ethan's mind raced. "The letters. They're from Jamie. But you said there was no return address. How did Mark know where to find you?" David's face darkened. "I don't know. A few years ago, Mark reached out, said he'd been looking for me. He told me Jamie was in trouble, but he wouldn't say more. Then the letters started coming. I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't face opening that door again." Ethan's anger flared. "So you hid them? You let me think we were a normal family, when you were keeping this huge part of your life from me." "I was trying to protect you." David's voice rose, then softened. "Ethan, you were a kid. I didn't want you growing up with the weight of my past. I wanted you to have a normal life, not one tangled up in my mistakes." "Mistakes?" Ethan's voice cracked. Loving someone isn't a mistake. Dad. Hiding it is. Claire stepped forward, her eyes glistening. Ethan's right. David, you should have told us. I love you, and I would have understood. But keeping this from us, it hurts. David's head bowed, his hands covering his face. I know. I'm sorry. I thought I could move on, build a new life with you. Claire. But Jamie, he's still there. In my head. In my heart. And now, with these letters, I don't know what he wants, or why he's reaching out. A knock at the door startled them. David stood, his face pale. That's probably Mark. Ethan's pulse quickened as David opened the door. A man in his late 30s stood there, his features sharp, his eyes carrying the same intensity Ethan had seen in his dad's old photos of Jamie. Mark's gaze swept the room, lingering on Ethan, then Claire, before settling on David. David, Mark said, his voice low. We need to talk. It's about Jamie. Ethan's heart skipped. The truth was close, but it felt like a storm was about to break. Mark stepped into the small room, his presence filling the space with an uneasy energy. He was lean, with dark hair streaked with early gray, and his eyes carried a weariness that made Ethan's stomach knot. The resemblance to Jamie was uncanny. Ethan had seen photos in the letters, tucked between heartfelt words, and Mark's face echoed his brother's in a way that felt like a ghost had walked in. Mark, David said, his voice a mix of relief and dread. Thanks for coming. Mark nodded, his gaze flicking to Ethan and Claire. This is not how I expected to see you again. David. A wedding. His tone held a hint of disbelief, maybe even judgment. Ethan bristled, stepping forward. You don't get to judge him. You don't know what he's been through. Mark raised an eyebrow, studying Ethan. You must be Ethan. You look like him. He didn't need to say Jamie's name. The weight of it hung in the air. Claire cleared her throat, her voice steady despite the tension. Mark, you said you know something about Jamie. Please, just tell us. Mark hesitated, then pulled a chair from the corner and sat, his hands clasped tightly. Jamie's alive, he said, the words landing like a stone in still water. But he's not okay. David's breath caught, and Ethan felt a chill run through him. Alive. The word was a relief, but Mark's tone promised more pain. What do you mean? David asked, his voice barely audible. Mark leaned forward, his eyes locked on David's. After he left you, Jamie tried to start over. He moved to Seattle, got a job teaching art at a community center. He was trying to rebuild. But our family, they never let him go. My dad kept tabs on him, made sure he stayed in line. Jamie cut contact with everyone, even me, for a while. But a few years ago, he started reaching out again. The letters, Ethan said, holding up the crumpled paper. He sent these to Dad. Mark nodded. I helped him find David's address. He didn't want to disrupt your life, David, but he needed to write, to process. He's been struggling mental health, addiction. He's in a bad place. David's face paled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped him. Mark's jaw tightened. I tried, but Jamie made me promise not to. He didn't want to drag you back into his mess. He said you had a son, a life. He wanted you to be happy. Ethan's chest ached. Jamie had been out there, suffering, and still thinking of his dad's happiness. It was selfless, but it hurt to know his dad had been kept in the dark. Where is he now? Ethan asked. Mark hesitated, his eyes flickering with something like fear. He's in Chicago. He came back a few months ago, but he's not himself. He's been staying in a halfway house, trying to get clean. But last week, he disappeared. I've been looking for him, but I'm scared he's in trouble, real trouble. David stood, his chair scraping against the floor. What kind of trouble? Mark's voice dropped. He got mixed up with some bad people. Debts. Drugs. I don't know the details. But he called me a few days ago. Sounded desperate. Said he needed to see you. David. That's why I reached out. Ethan's mind spun. Jamie, the man his dad had loved, was out there, lost in a city they all called home, tangled in something dangerous. And now, because of Ethan's outburst, the truth was out, pulling them all into the chaos. Claire stepped closer to David, her hand on his shoulder. We need to find him, she said, her voice firm. If he's in trouble, we can help. David looked at her, his eyes searching hers. Claire, this isn't your burden. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She cut in. I love you, David. And if Jamie's part of your past, he's part of this family, too. We don't leave people behind. Ethan felt a surge of admiration for Claire. She was standing by his dad. Even now, when everything was falling apart. He turned to Mark. Do you know where to start looking? Mark nodded. I have a few leads, places he used to go, people he might have contacted. But it's not safe. If you're coming, you need to be ready for anything. David's face hardened with determination. I'm in. I owe him that much. Ethan's heart raced. I'm coming too. David turned to him, his expression torn. Ethan, this could be dangerous. I can't let you. You can't stop me. Ethan said, his voice steady. He's part of my story, too. I need to know who he is. For a moment, no one spoke. Then David nodded. A silent agreement. The four of them, David, Claire, Ethan, and Mark, were bound now by a past that refused to stay buried and a future that depended on finding Jamie before it was too late. The Chicago evening was cool, the city skyline glittering against a twilight sky as David, Ethan, Claire, and Mark piled into Mark's beat-up sedan. Ethan sat in the back, the letter still tucked in his pocket, its weight a constant reminder of why they were here. The church, the wedding, the guests they all felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by a mission that felt both urgent and surreal. Mark drove, his hands tight on the wheel, navigating through the city's bustling streets. First stop is a bar on the south side, he said, his voice clipped. Jamie used to hang out there when he was struggling. One of his old friends might know something. David stared out the window, his face etched with worry. What's the place like? He asked. Rough, Mark admitted. Not the kind of spot you'd want your kid in. He glanced at Ethan in the rearview mirror. You sure you're up for this? Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned. I'm not a kid. I can handle it. Claire reached back, squeezing Ethan's hand. We're in this together, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan felt a rush of gratitude. She was the anchor keeping them grounded, even as the world tilted. The bar was a dim, gritty hole in the wall, its neon sign flickering above a door that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of conversation. Ethan's heart pounded as they stepped in, eyes scanning the room for any sign of Jamie or danger. Mark led them to a corner booth where a wiry man in his 30s sat nursing a beer. He had a faded tattoo on his arm and eyes that darted nervously. This is Tony, Mark said. He knew Jamie. Tony looked them over, his gaze lingering on David. You're the guy from the letters, he said, his voice rough. Jamie talked about you. A lot. David's jaw tightened. Where is he? Tony. We need to find him. Tony leaned back, lighting a cigarette. Jamie's in deep. Owes money to some guys you don't mess with. Last I heard, he was crashing at a warehouse on 47th Street, trying to lay low. But those guys, they don't let debts slide. Ethan's pulse quickened. What kind of guys? Tony's eyes flicked to him, then away. The kind who break bones first and ask questions later. Jamie's scared. Man, he mentioned you. David said he needed to make things right before it's too late. David's face paled, but he nodded. Can you take us to the warehouse? Tony hesitated, then stubbed out his cigarette. I'll point you in the right direction, but I'm not going in. Those guys see me. I'm done. Outside, Tony gave them an address and a warning. Be careful. Jamie's not the same guy you knew. David. He's broken. The drive to the warehouse was silent, the weight of Tony's words pressing down on them. Ethan's mind raced with images of Jamie, someone he'd never met, but felt connected to through his dad's love and pain. What would they find when they got there? And what did Jamie mean by making things right? The warehouse loomed in the darkness, a hulking structure with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Mark parked a block away, and they approached on foot, the night air sharp against Ethan's skin. Claire stayed close to David, her wedding dress swapped for jeans and a jacket, her resolve unshaken. Stay behind me, David whispered, his voice firm but trembling. Ethan nodded, though every instinct screamed to run toward the danger, to find the man who'd shaped his dad's past. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and shadows, the air heavy with the smell of oil and decay. They moved quietly, guided by the faint sound of voices. Ethan's heart thudded as they rounded a corner and saw a group of men, rough, armed, circling someone curled on the floor. It was Jamie. Even in the dim light, Ethan recognized him from the photo saw the now. Gaunt, with haunted eyes. His clothes were torn, his face bruised. But there was a flicker of the man David had loved, the man who'd written those letters. Jamie. David's voice broke the silence, and the men spun around, hands reaching for weapons. Ethan froze, his breath catching as one of them, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. Who the hell are you? The man growled. David raised his hands, stepping protectively in front of Ethan and Claire. I'm here for him, he said, nodding toward Jamie. Let him go. The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. He owes us. You got the money, or you got a problem. Ethan's eyes darted to Jamie, who was struggling to sit up, his gaze locking onto David's. David, he whispered, his voice raw. You shouldn't be here. But David didn't back down. And Ethan knew, in that moment, that they weren't leaving without Jim, no matter what it cost. The warehouse's air was thick with tension, the dim light casting long shadows that danced across the concrete floor. Ethan's heart hammered as he stood behind his dad, his eyes fixed on Jamie, who was slumped against a crate, his face a map of bruises and regret. The scarred man's threat hung heavy, his hand resting on a gun tucked into his waistband. I don't have money, David said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. But I'm not leaving without him. The man smirked, glancing at his crew, 3 others, all watching with predatory calm. Big talk for a guy who walked into the wrong place. You got 10 seconds to change my mind. Claire stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. There's got to be another way. What does he owe? We can figure this out. The man's eyes narrowed, appraising her. Lady, you don't know what you're stepping into. He owes $5,000. Cash. Now. Ethan's stomach dropped. $5,000. They didn't have that kind of money on hand. He glanced at Jamie, who was shaking his head weakly, his eyes pleading with David. Go? Jamie rasped. Please. David. Don't do this. But David ignored him. His jaw set. I'm not leaving you again, he said, the words carrying a weight that silenced the room. Ethan saw it, then the depth of his dad's love, unbroken by years or pain. It wasn't just about the past. It was about a promise David couldn't break. Mark, who'd been quiet, stepped forward. I've got some cash, he said, pulling out his wallet. Not $5,000, but maybe enough to buy some time. The scarred man snorted. You think a couple hundred's gonna cut it? Try again. Ethan's mind raced. They needed a way out. Something to shift the balance. His eyes scanned the warehouse, landing on a stack of crates near the men unstable. Teetering. An idea sparked. Reckless, but possible. He caught Claire's eye and nodded subtly toward the crates, hoping she'd understand. Claire's gaze flickered, and she gave a small nod. What if we get you the money? She said, her voice calm, distracting. Give us a day. We'll come back with it. The man laughed, but his attention was on Claire now. Ethan moved slowly, inching toward the crates, his heart pounding. He didn't know if this would work, but he had to try. He reached out, gripping the edge of a crate, and with a quick shove, sent it crashing down. The noise was deafening, wood splintering as the crates collapsed, scattering debris and startling the men. David seized the moment, lunging for Jamie, pulling him up as Claire grabbed Ethan's arm. Run! David shouted. They bolted, weaving through the maze of crates, the men's curses echoing behind them. Mark led the way, his knowledge of the warehouse guiding them to a side exit. Ethan's legs burned, his breath ragged, but he kept moving, Jamie's weight heavy against David's shoulder. Outside, the cool night air hit them like a wave. They piled into Mark's car, David and Jamie in the back, Ethan and Claire up front. Mark floored the gas, the tires screeching as they sped away. Ethan glanced back, expecting to see the men chasing, but the street was empty for now. Jamie was breathing heavily, his head resting against David's shoulder. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice broken. I didn't want you to see me like this. David's hand tightened around Jamie's. Don't. Just don't. Ethan turned away, his chest tight. He'd wanted answers, but this was more than he'd bargained for. Jamie was real now, not just a name in a letter, but a man carrying scars physical and otherwise. And they weren't out of danger yet. Where are we going? Ethan asked, his voice shaking. Somewhere safe, Mark said, his eyes on the road. I know a Placia friend's apartment. Off the grid. We can lay low there. Figure out what's next. Claire nodded, her hand still on Ethan's arm. We need to get Jamie cleaned up. Maybe a doctor. And we need to talk about what just happened. David looked at Jamie, his eyes soft with a mix of love and pain. Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. The car fell silent, the hum of the engine the only sound. Ethan's mind was a storm of questions, but one stood out. What did Jamie mean by making things right? And what would it cost to keep him safe? They reached the apartment, a small, cluttered space above a laundromat. Mark's friend, a quiet woman named Lena, let them in without questions, her eyes kind but guarded. They settled Jamie on a couch, where he slumped, exhausted. Claire found a first aid kit, tending to his cuts while David sat beside him, never letting go of his hand. Ethan watched, feeling like an outsider in his own story. He'd started this by crashing the wedding, but now he was in deeper than he'd ever imagined. And as he looked at Jamie, fragile but alive. He knew there was no going back. The apartment smelled of laundry detergent and old coffee. A faint hum from the machines downstairs vibrating through the floor. Jamie sat on the couch, his breathing steadier now, though his eyes still carried a haunted edge. Claire dabbed at a cut on his cheek with a cloth, her hands gentle but precise, while David hovered close, his face a mix of relief and guilt. Ethan stood by the window, watching the street below, his mind racing with everything they'd been through in the last few hours. Lena, Mark's friend, brought a tray of mismatched mugs filled with tea. "You're safe here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you need to tell me what's going on if I'm sticking my neck out for you." Mark nodded, setting his mug down. "It's my brother, Jamie. He's in trouble debts. Bad people. We just pulled him out of a mess. But they'll come looking." Lena's eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. "All right. You've got tonight. Figure out your next move." Ethan turned from the window, his gaze settling on Jamie. Up close, he could see the toll the years had taken, lines etched around his eyes, a tremor in his hands. But there was something else, too. A spark of the man from the letters. The one who'd loved his dad fiercely. "Jamie," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Why did you come back? Why now?" Jamie's eyes met his, and for a moment, Ethan saw his dad in them, vulnerable, searching. "I didn't plan to," Jamie said, his voice rough. "I tried to stay away, to let David have his life. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. About you." He looked at David, his expression softening. "I wrote those letters because I needed to say I was sorry. For leaving. For everything." David's hand tightened around Jamie's. "You don't have to apologize. I should have fought harder for you." Jamie shook his head. "You couldn't have won, David. My family, they were relentless. And I was weak. I let them break me." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to be angry, to blame Jamie for the pain his dad had carried. But all he felt was sadness. Jamie wasn't a villain, he was just a man who'd been crushed by a world that didn't accept him. Claire finished bandaging Jamie's cuts and sat back, her eyes soft but resolute. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Those men won't stop looking for him." Mark spoke up. "We need to pay off the debt. It's the only way to get them off his back. I've got some savings, maybe $2,000. But we'll need more." "I can help," David said, his voice firm. "I've got some money put away. It's not much, but it's a start." Ethan's heart sank. His dad's savings were for emergencies, for their future, maybe even for college. But he didn't argue. This was bigger than money. This was about family, about making things right. "I want to help, too," Ethan said, surprising himself. "I've got some cash from my summer job. It's not a lot, but it's something." David looked at him, pride and worry in his eyes. "Ethan, you don't have to. I want to." Ethan cut in. "He's important to you, Dad. That makes him important to me." Jamie's eyes glistened, and he looked away, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Ethan." Claire smiled, a quiet strength in her expression. "We'll figure this out. Together." The room settled into a fragile calm, the weight of their decision grounding them. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. Those men in the warehouse weren't the type to let go easily. And Jamie's past, tangled with addiction and desperation, wasn't something they could fix in one night. Mark pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know someone who might help a guy who deals with debts like this. He's not exactly clean, but he's discreet. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow." David nodded, but his eyes stayed on Jamie. "What do you need, Jamie?" Not just money. What do you need to get through this? Jamie hesitated, his hands trembling. I need to get clean. For good this time. And I need you. His voice broke, and he looked at David, raw and unguarded. I never stopped loving you. David's breath hitched, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan glanced at Claire, worried about how she'd take it. But she just squeezed David's hand, her eyes steady. We're here, she said softly. All of us. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. This was messy, complicated, but it was real. And for the first time, he saw his dad not just as a father, but as a man who'd loved and lost, who was still fighting to hold on to what mattered. As the night deepened, they made a plan, raise the money, meet Mark's contact, get Jamie help. But Ethan knew the real challenge wasn't just the debt, it was healing the wounds that had brought them here. And that would take more than courage. It would take love. The morning sun filtered through the apartment's dusty blinds, casting stripes of light across the room where Ethan, David, Claire, and Jamie sat around a small table. Mark had left at dawn to meet his contact, promising to return with a plan to settle Jamie's debt. The air was heavy with unspoken questions, but there was a quiet resolve binding them together, a family forged not by blood, but by choice. Jamie sipped his coffee, his hand steadier now, though his eyes still carried shadows. Ethan watched him, trying to reconcile the broken man before him with the vibrant artist from his dad's stories. David sat close, his hand resting near Jamie's, a silent promise of support. Claire, ever the anchor, was making notes on a pad, listing ways to pool their resources. I called the shop, David said, breaking the silence. I can take out a loan against it. It'll cover most of the $5,000. Claire looked up, her brow furrowed. David, that's your livelihood. Are you sure? I'm sure, David said, his voice firm. Jamie's worth it. And so is this. He glanced at Ethan, a small smile tugging at his lips. You taught me that, kid. No more hiding. Ethan's chest swelled with pride, but also fear. This was real now, their savings, their future, all on the line for a man who'd been a ghost until yesterday. But looking at Jamie, at the way his dad's eyes softened around him, Ethan knew it was right. The door opened, and Mark walked in, his face grim but determined. I talked to my guy, he said, setting a duffel bag on the table. He'll take $3,000 to call off the dogs. I've got two. Like I said, can you cover the rest? David nodded. I'll have it by tonight. Mark's shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. We meet him at noon. Neutral Spoda Diner on Clark Street. But Jamie, you stay here. It's safer. Jamie shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. No. I need to face this. I caused this mess. David started to protest, but Jamie held up a hand. Please, David, let me do this. I need to start fixing things. Ethan saw the resolve in Jamie's eyes, the same spark he'd glimpsed in the letters. He wasn't just fighting for himself, was fighting for a chance to be whole again. For David. For all of them. The diner was crowded, the clatter of plates and chatter a stark contrast to the tension at their table. Mark's contact, a wiry man named Vince, sat across from them, his eyes cold but professional. David slid an envelope across the table, the cash inside representing years of hard work. Vince counted it, then nodded. We're square. Your boy's free. But tell him to stay clean. Next time, no one's bailing him out. Mark's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He will. As Vince left, Ethan felt a weight lift. But it wasn't over. Jamie still needed help, rehab, therapy, A fresh start. And there was Claire, who'd stood by them through it all. Her wedding day a distant memory. Back at the apartment, they sat together, the reality of their choices settling in. Jamie looked at David, his voice steady. I'm going to check into a program tomorrow. I want to be better for me. For you. David nodded, his eyes glistening. I'll be there. Every step. Claire took Jamie's hand, her smile warm. We all will. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He'd started this by crashing the wedding, driven by anger and a need for truth. But what he'd found was bigger, a family redefined, not by secrets, but by love that refused to break. Months later, the air was crisp with autumn as Ethan, David, Claire, and Jamie stood in a park, the same one where Ethan had imagined that first image. Jamie was stronger now, his smile brighter after weeks in rehab. Claire and David hadn't rescheduled the wedding not yet, but they wore their love openly. A quiet strength that included Jamie, not as a rival, but as family. Ethan looked at them, his heart full. He'd stopped a wedding, exposed a truth, and set them on a path none of them expected. But as he watched his dad laugh, Jamie's hand on his shoulder, Claire's arm around them both, he knew it was worth it. They were broken, imperfect, but together. And that was enough.